This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by TrackVia. On this edition of Fed Gov Today, the Pentagon's DC3 is in a pretty unique position.
We've got folks that are ingesting data from a wide variety of sources and feeding it back out to a wide variety of partners in furtherance of their mission, but we can also capitalize that for our own internal defense, and it's absolutely essential that we do that.
The CIO of the DC3, Eric Oliver, on Fed Gov Today in just a moment. Federal programs are still running on spreadsheets, SharePoint, and systems built with old technology. That creates more work and slows things down. TrackVia Government is a workflow modernization platform that lets agencies and prime partners quickly digitize program delivery, field services, compliance reporting, and operations, delivering secure audit-ready workflows without lengthy implementations. Modern, mobile, mission-ready. Learn more at trackvia.com/government. A transformation is underway at the Pentagon Cyber Crime Center. Eric Oliver, the Director of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer at the DC3, told me about it at an FCA DC event, April 23rd. My thanks to FCA DC, especially Teresa Pines, for inviting me to be a part of that. Eric, thanks for joining me today. At that event, a lot of industry people in the audience. What was the main message that you wanted to convey to them in the course of that conversation? Welcome, Eric.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to expand upon the comments there. The real message I want to get out to industry is DC3 is in the midst of a transformation, and we need to continue that transformation at pace. The organization grew up very entrepreneurial, and at 28 years of age, any entrepreneurial business needs to go through some maturation. So we're at that exact point, and we have technology that has been here for an extended period of time in facilities that we've occupied since we were created. That really needs to move into more sustainable facilities. It's great that we had highly motivated folks doing amazing things. But if your HVAC is 20 years old, there's a cost to repairing that. Maybe you should just go ahead and move it into a data center. So those are the kinds of transformational things we're doing. We also had highly motivated folks that would do things very much at the console, right? If a firewall needs to be reconfigured, there was tribal knowledge inside somebody's head, and they would go to the console and they would make the changes that they thought needed to be changed. The challenge there is it's corporate knowledge is lost in somebody's head, and if they depart, you're in a bad spot. Modern business doesn't do it that way. We use automation. You use infrastructure as code. You do all the kinds of things that just make sense. We're in that transformation right now. We need talent. We need folks who understand the technology, and we need to make this happen, and we need to make it happen quickly.
What are the most important elements of that transformation? I think of the framework of people, process, technology. You've already talked about talent and having folks who understand the technology. What are the pieces that you're moving from, and what are the pieces that you're moving to, Eric?
Yeah, as I kind of touched on, we're in leased facilities with on-premise servers. Because of our mission, we are at the nexus of law enforcement, counterintelligence, and cybersecurity or cyberspace operations, as I like to see. And so making sure that we meet the regulations and all the policy that governs those three areas is absolutely foundational. We can't be taking risks with the data and the missions, so we have to be very, very deliberate. One of the things that, because we're Department of War, Department of Defense, one of the things that isn't always obvious to the business representatives that come try to talk to us is that we actually have to comply with FBI criminal justice information standards. That's not common across the department. And so sometimes it's important that a vendor come to us not just with their DOD, DOW representative, but they bring in those law enforcement folks because we are heavily involved in the counterintelligence business. Bringing in your IC experts are important as well. in that vein of IC, one of the things we have recently done is we moved, or in the process of moving into the DAF CloudWorks, Department of Air Force CloudWorks. That is the Air Force's intelligence community cloud environment. We're using that contract vehicle to start migrating things off premise into the cloud. And I think understanding that is foundational as well. So I'll pause right there.
How does that, the fact that you touch all of these different areas of specialty, and that I imagine you're exchanging data with a lot of these different types of organizations, how does that inform the way that you think about the architecture you're going to need as you undertake this transformation, Eric?
Yeah, segmentation is key, right? It all starts with identity and the data. We have recently completed a exhaustive inventory of the data that we have in our possession. Vital to that is understanding the authority under which we came to possess that data, because once you understand the legal authority under which you possess it, that prescribes what you can in fact do with it. You can't just share that with anybody. There's a program in which there's the mandatory incident program. If a defense industrial base company who is dealing with unclassified COI information is compromised, they are legally required to report that to our organization. If it's a mandatory incident report like that, it's available legally for any legitimate U.S. government purpose. If we have data that came to us for a different purpose under different authority, different handling rules apply. So understanding the data, the authorities, and then the people. So it really gets into role-based access control and identity-based access control. Fine-grained at the data field level, we must do that to maintain our ability to operate.
And I imagine that chain of custody also indicates where you can and can't put that data, i.e. in a cloud environment or in a certain type of cloud environment, or must be in a data center on premises and so on. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Well, while I was on stage, I made a semi-rhetorical comment about I've had cloud service providers come to me and say, "Hey, we'd love to have your data," and then they find out we've got child sexual assault material, and they go, "Oh, we don't want that." Well,
right.
That's not generally true. Because the FBI has, I think they've got 13 forensics labs now, digital forensics labs, and they do, in fact, exist in the cloud, and they have all kinds of contraband in the cloud. It really gets to the point that I made earlier. The Department of Defense, Department of War representative may not have experience with managing that kind of data, but the law enforcement authorities do. And so bring the right representative to the discussion to provide maximum value to DC3.
What does that data exchange with all of those different organizations inside and outside the department mean for the way that you have, first of all, store the data, second of all, curate it, and then track all of that chain of custody information? Because I imagine it's not just curating the information, the data, it's got to be tagged in a certain way so that at some future date, if you need to pull it out and use it again, you have all of that information available.
Yeah, where the data is stored is important. We aren't the investigative authorities here. We support investigations. So it gets really, really expensive if we want to just keep evidence just because it's a good idea. What we need to make sure is that we provide the analysis and the data to the investigating authorities, and then they can maintain custody of it. Some cases require you to retain the evidence for 100 years in its original digital form. If the investigating authority is doing that, we probably don't need to do that. So that's part of the discussion that's going on. We have to be, every single case requires its own thought process because they've all got unique circumstances. So it's a lot of analytical work that we have to do to make sure we're handling the data right.
What advantage do you think that you gain, if any, by being the CIO for the Cyber Crime Center in defending the Cyber Crime Center from the threat landscape that exists today, from the threats that are out there, given that you get a chance to see some of them, you and your colleagues, close up?
Yeah, that's actually a conversation I was having just this morning because we have the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Information Sharing Environment. We called the DICE. The DICE recently sent out a warning about some malign activity that was occurring, that was being exploited. Fortunately, our DICE team was also talking to our CISO, our CISO here, and they both had the exact same information. So we're now defending ourselves as we're also enabling defense of the entire defense industrial base. There's a lot of synergy here, and that's one of the things that makes DC3 unique is we've got folks that are ingesting data from a wide variety of sources and feeding it back out to a wide variety of partners in furtherance of their mission, but we can also capitalize that for our own internal defense. And it's absolutely essential that we do that because, as you would imagine, if we're supporting counterintelligence operations and we're supporting a large number of counterintelligence operations, we would become a pretty big target for a foreign intelligence service. So we absolutely must be the best. I tell my boss regularly, he's probably tired of hearing me say it. It wouldn't look good on the front page of the Washington Post if the DC3, the Center of Counterintelligence Support, was compromised by a foreign intelligence service. That doesn't go down well. So we want to avoid that.
Absolutely. One of the things that I give you a lot of credit for is that on stage, you were the first person to bring up Mythos and the impact that it potentially will have on how people think about what they've got on hand already, software-wise, what those vulnerabilities look like, and how those vulnerabilities can be exploited. How has that changed the way that you and your colleagues think about what your risk postures are as far as the potential threat landscape, Eric?
Yeah, step number one in my thinking about Mythos was to turn to some of our mission partners and say, okay, who's got the best Mythos or Mythos-like capability? I want to turn it against my own code base right here at DC3. I don't want somebody else doing it. And I also started a discussion about, okay, because we run the vulnerability disclosure program for the entire department, and we also have a defense industrial base vulnerability disclosure program. There's white hat hackers all over the world that are disclosing vulnerabilities to the department and to our defense industrial base partners. Why do we need to wait for them to do it? Why don't we use the power of AI to augment their capabilities and be faster and better at identifying the vulnerabilities ourselves? So that's a discussion that's just started. That's only going to increase. The pace of threat emergence is not going to decrease, and so we got to react to the environment in which we find ourselves.
I want to go back to the transformation effort that you're undertaking that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, Eric. How would you judge that as on track or needing or adjustment moving forward? How do you have mileposts set, places you want to be at certain times, or do you just kind of have an end state or future state in mind?
Well, there are some zero trust milestones the department has established, so we're wanting to make sure we track as close as we can and get ahead of those if we can. Frankly, if we're being honest, doing this, I know nobody hear me say this in public, but I'm going to say it. We're not on schedule. In my view, I think we've got a lot of work to do and catching up. So I do think that the entire planet has work to do to catch up with the AI emergence. We already touched on that. One of the things I think DC3 has to do is we got to start thinking forward about investigations involving autonomous systems, agentic systems, and human augmentation AI systems, right? We're going to get a case when an AI, and we call it an agentic system, made a decision that had negative consequences. And the question is going to be, who's culpable? How do you investigate that? This is an area where we probably need some academic outreach support. We probably need some industry IRAD to lean in. There is emerging research in this area, but we're going to get the case before we're ready, I suspect. I want to be as ready as we can be.
Eric, I really appreciated and enjoyed having you on the panel, and I appreciate you joining me today to follow up. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure. Appreciate the time.
You can read more about the DC3 on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. A 10-year cloud computing contract that could be worth more than $4 billion is coming from the Commerce Department. The agency's SAM.gov listing for the contract says, quote, only original equipment manufacturers acting as the cloud service provider will be eligible for award. Brian Epley, the Chief Information Officer at the Commerce Department, will tell you why the department's doing it that way on this week's Fed Gov Today TV. The new show debuts 10 a.m. this Sunday morning on ABC7 in Washington and on YouTube. It's on a number of times all weekend long on the American Forces Network. If you missed the debut, you can watch on demand on the FedGov Today YouTube channel and on fedgovtoday.com. The FedGov Today podcast comes back this coming Tuesday. I'm Francis Rose. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.